This is an interview with Theo Salisbury. He's a longtime Subud member and helper and had various other jobs in Subud. Theo, can you start by telling us how you found and came into Subud?
Okay, well, I'll try to be succinct about this. I sometimes need to work at being succinct, so I'll try not to bring in too much context. But I will say that it started, I think the first step in this process for me was when I met Wayne Larigo, because we were both freshmen at Stanford the same year. We started at Stanford University in the 1959-1960 academic year. And I met him because he was the roommate of another student from Palo Alto High School where I had gone. And so I met him through this roommate. And eventually we became good friends. Um, Now he was doing some what to me seemed like kind of wild stuff back in those days, experimenting with some drugs, not just marijuana, but some other things. And then he left there and went back east to attend Pratt Institute for art school back somewhere in the East Coast, and then moved back out to California. And I met up with him again in about 1961 when I had become a college dropout after 2 years, and I moved to Berkeley, and I lived in Berkeley from 61 to 69. And Wayne and I became very good friends at that time. And then later, after he was open, he introduced me to Subud, and then I got open. He introduced me and Martine Almanzan at the same time.
What
And
year was that?
that would have been, well, he first talked about Subud to us. He had actually come over to visit with another high school friend of mine named Hugh Ellis and his wife, his new wife then. Um, and they eventually did get open in the Sacramento group back in 1966, dropped out in 68. But on that particular night, which was December of 1963, Martine showed up at my place, and then we decided to go over and visit Hugh Ellis in Berkeley, and then Wayne was there talking to Hugh. And so Martine and I kind of glommed onto that, and we took to it right away. And we both got open about the same time, early in 1964. And I guess I would add this, that I went first to Subud, Berkeley, because I was living in Berkeley at that time. Seemed like a logical first step. And I did attend 3 meetings there, applicant meetings, but we didn't learn much. They didn't take time to talk to anybody then. But after 3 meetings, I knew that I wanted to get opened, although I could not have told you why. It was just a feeling that, yeah, this is right. This is what I got to do. So then I kind of went there, and I actually got open a little bit early because I had signed up for the California Army National Guard to avoid getting drafted and sent to Vietnam, which worked, thank God. So I did get called up as a National Guard a couple times, but never had to go over to Vietnam or anything really horrific like that. So, but anyway, because of that enlistment and my need to go to basic training, I got opened a little bit early in February. My opening date was February 3rd, 1964.
And how was your opening?
Well, the one thing that I remember about it that was quite distinctive. Now, I had been on one trip on acid or LSD uh, through the offices of a local psychologist that my older brother had gone to, and then he referred me to this guy, and I was seeing that guy. He turned out to be connected with a guy who was a Subud member in San Francisco named Sanella. I think later he was Hadrian Sanella. At that time, I don't remember what his first name was, but Hadrian was a Subud name. So he came down and did the official thing of handing over the LSD to the psychologist I was working with. And so he was there theoretically to administer it. And then he went back to San Francisco. Later, I got to know Hadrian a little bit, although not really well. But he was an interesting guy. He was not primarily a psychiatrist, but that was like his second calling, medically speaking. But he was mainly, I think, a podiatrist or something like that. A weird combination. Anyways, through him, I had that first trip on acid. And what I recognized in my opening was that I felt the same vibration, it seemed to me at the time, that I had felt when I got high on acid that first time. So I recognized that and I said, wow, this is something that's real. I've experienced this before. So that convinced me to keep going. Now I could say more about what happened in the early stages if you want me to talk about that, but why don't you pick up from there, whatever you might want to ask.
Yeah, go ahead with the early stages.
Okay. Well, I think the next thing that happened was really notable was after a few months. Now I ended up, for whatever reason, lying down on the floor a lot. And I was one time after a few months, I was lying on my back on the floor in the latihan room. We actually, although we called ourselves Subud Palo Alto, we actually were renting a ballet studio out in Los Altos at that time. We went through a lot of different places, and that was one of the places. But in that ballet studio, I was lying on my back one time, and all of a sudden my body just went sprung. It was almost like I just arched up off the ceiling, off the floor, and then dropped back down, completely unexpected. And I said, okay, this is definitely something real here. This isn't just a vibration. This is some movement over which I had no control at all, no intention, no expectation. It just happened. So that was the next step. And I could go one more step if you want me to.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to fast forward a few months. There was a guy named Raymond Oppenheim. I don't know if that name rings any bell with you, but he had been in at Wisma Subud during the, what shall I call it, the abortive communist coup, whatever it really was. It was a huge, huge thing, as you know. At least a third of a million people died in Indonesia at that time. And Raymond was in Cilandak, or at Wisma Subud, in the village of Cilandak, which at that time was outside Jakarta. Jakarta later expanded and took that in. It's now part of Jakarta, but it wasn't at that time. And so he spent a lot of time with Pak Sudarto, or Mas Sudarto, as he was called then. They did a lot of interesting testing on stuff, particularly about, I remember C.S. Lewis, because Raymond was a big fan of C.S. Lewis, as I became later on. And I think he said that one time that Pak Sudarto said that C.S. Lewis had gone as far as he could go spiritually without actually having received the Holy Spirit or the great life force. I found out later that actually he was probationing in Subud when he died, as was Aldous Huxley. And Virendra Vitachi knew about this, okay? But at that time, I didn't know anything about all that. But from talking to Raymond, I knew that, for example, that Bapak, like all the men, they had this compound, with a wall around it. And all the men, including Bapak, would walk around the perimeter guarding the wall at night. And Bapak, like any of them, carried a revolver in case somebody tried to climb over the wall and invade the Subud compound, which nobody did, thankfully. But there was an awful lot of violent stuff going on around that, fortunately, none of it got inside the compound. So that was interesting. So anyway, to go the next step with that, there was an occasion when I had decided that I wanted to become a Montessori teacher. I had joined something called the San Francisco Montessori Society in '65. Well, let's see, had I gotten a teaching credential at that point? I guess not. But anyway, I was very interested in that, in education generally. And so one time I came with Wayne Larigo to the Palo Alto latihan. I kind of quit going to Berkeley because I liked Palo Alto better. And I would drive all the way from Berkeley down to Palo Alto, partly just because I knew Wayne and I really liked Wayne and I could stay overnight at his place. And I went to latihan there a lot, including at this place in Palo Alto. So I was there one time and I said, well, I would like to test about whether to pursue Montessori, becoming a Montessori teacher. And I tested because it was going to cost me $250 to get trained by this lady who actually had been trained by Maria Montessori herself. She was from Sri Lanka. She moved to this country and was training people and all that. But it was a lot of money for me, and I didn't want to spend that if it was going to be a waste of time. So the way it went was that the helpers tested. Now, I had not had much experience with doing testing, and I can't say that I received anything for myself that was clear, but the helpers said, well, here's what we received about this. That right now, what you're doing is you're trying to hike up this mountain with this big, heavy pack on your back. And if you let go of the idea about Montessori and just let it go and forget about it, it's like taking the pack off your back. And all of a sudden, it's let go of this weight, and it'll be so much easier for you. So I didn't receive any of this directly, but I went outside while they did some later testing. And by that time, um, Wayne was also a helper. He was a pretty new helper. And he was in there testing with them. And when he came out, and I then got into the car and drove him with him. But while I was waiting for him to come out from the testing that he was doing with the other helpers, all of a sudden I felt as if I was aware of this spring inside my head that had wound up as tight as it could go. And if it wound up any tighter, it was going to break. And then all of a sudden, it's like it started to unwind, and this energy went down through what I later figured out must be the throat chakra. At that time, I'd heard of the chakras, but I thought it was just some Hindu head trip. I didn't know that there was actually reality to the chakras. This was my first experience that the chakras are real. And what happened with that energy was it went down and it started going like this in my chest. And something kind of went woo around in my chest, and this spring started to unwind in my head, and I started to giggle. And I just started laughing and laughing and laughing. It was like some huge weight began to lift off of me. Wayne came out and I got in the car and we drove back to this place and I spent the night and I was just laughing all the way home because I felt so much lighter all of a sudden. So that was huge. That was like, wow, okay, this is real. This is real stuff here that's happening to me. You know, I couldn't doubt it after that.
Mhm. So did you ever follow through on the Montessori thing or not?
Well, not too much. No, I actually had joined this group in San Francisco called the San Francisco Montessori Society. And the second year, they elected me as chair, but that's because nobody else wanted to do it. But at some time in that midpoint, I had dropped out of college and I decided, well, it's time for me to think about finishing up my bachelor's degree. So I did end up testing about that. And I eventually, for the first time, received something in testing. It was very, very kind of vague and unclear, but it seemed to be, yes, it was almost time for me to start. And so when they wanted me to continue for the second year as the head of the Montessori Society in San Francisco, I said, well, I really can't do that because I'm going to have to start attending classes at Berkeley and I just won't have time for it. So the end result of that was because nobody wanted to take on that job, the society just dissolved. So that was the
Oh,
end of that. Okay. But it was the beginning of me for resuming my academic career, which I did. And a lot of things came, help came to me through the latihan as I kind of got more into figuring out where I wanted to go with my education.
yeah. So has the testing or the receiving of testing questions and answers. Has that been a big part of your life?
Well, it has, but in an odd sort of way. It's as if there's a part of me that is most of the time not quite sure whether I'm receiving something or if it's just my imagination. But although sometimes it seemed very clear, and I said, okay, I may be kidding myself because I'm worried about whether this is really my imagination or a real receiving, but clearly this is a real receiving. I've had that too. And then I kind of doubled down and said, yeah, this has to be the real thing. At other times I say, well, I'm not really sure, but that's okay. I follow it as best I can. I see how it works out. And if it seems to work out well, then I figure, okay, that was probably for real. But there have been times when I've received stuff that very soon as I see results come from that receiving and following that guidance, said, yep, no doubt that was a real receiving.
Yeah.
And yet that question still bothers me sometimes. That is, I still wonder how much of this is still coming from my imagination and how much is real receiving. But I just decided, what the hell? I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to go ahead and do the best I can.
Yeah. Have you had much experience around BOPOC?
A fair amount, because I did end up going to Wisma Subud. This was actually a graduation present from my parents. I lived in Berkeley from 61 to 69. I resumed my education. I dropped out of Stanford after 2 years, and I went back to UC Berkeley as a history major, and then I got a secondary teaching credential, which at that time was a lifetime credential. So in theory, that doesn't exist anymore, but I could go back and teach now with that credential if I wanted to, and if the right opportunity was there. Not that I have any interest in doing that, but that's a lifetime standard secondary teaching credential that I got.
Mm.
Anyway, when I finished that up, I had some incompletes, so I didn't actually graduate from my with my bachelor's degree till September of 1963. No, not 63. What am I thinking? 60. Oh, try to get the year here. 66, 67. I forget exactly. Anyway, but because I finished up and got the degree, and my parents said, okay, if you want, we'll pay for you for a trip to go to Chalandok. And so I went there, and I spent 2 months that summer. Well, it was the summer that when Nixon, when when the Soviets invaded Hungary, I think it was. It was that summer, whatever that was, whatever year. And what I remember is that I had already by that time become good friends with Peter, the operatic tenor who was gay, a gay man. I didn't know that at the time, but I had gotten to know him from spending time in the San Francisco Center, getting to know him. For example, he and I and Roger Basanya went to see 2001 in the Cinerama, this gigantic screen in 1968 in San Francisco. That was mind blowing to see on that huge screen where they had to coordinate 3 different cameras and all that. Wow, what a trip that was, man. But I had begun to get well acquainted with Peter. What did he become? He was Peter, and then he was Lutfi. Lutfi
Ludwig Barrett.
Barrett. Lutfi Barrett, yeah.
Yeah.
And he and I became pretty close, and I got to know him very well. Well, when I arrived at Wisma Subud in 68, he saw me coming through the gate. I'd gotten off the bus or taxi or whatever it was. And he came down the steps and he greeted me in a very friendly manner and made me feel very welcome there. And I got to know him pretty well. And we corresponded actually a lot right up until the time he died at Wisma Mulia in England in 19, what would it have been? What year? Now again, if I had a minute, I could think exactly what year. Oh, 1983, I think it was 1983. He died at Wisma. Now, he did get another Subud name right before he died, which is somewhere amongst this pile of old letters I have, including one for him, but I don't remember. But it was a later Subud name than Lutfi. But I don't remember now what the name was. But we did correspond right up at the end. And I just learned to really love that guy. He was just, and I learned, for example, that he went over the top at the Battle of the Somme. He was there. And we, for example, were big fans of the music of Benjamin Britten. I don't, you know, if you know who that is. But he wrote this incredible thing called the War Requiem. And boy, listening to that music with some of the poetry that he said mixed in with parts of the Catholic Mass and so on, or the Anglican Mass, is almost like being there, about as close to being there as you could be without actually being there. And Lutfi and I both had that feeling about it. He said, yeah, this is so real. That music is so incredible. It's not fun to listen to, but anyway, I just love Lutfi so much, and I miss him a lot. Like a lot of people, you know, who have gone before me. And I really pray for his good favor in his ongoing life and wherever he's at now, and in the care of Bapak and the angels. And
So getting back to the question,
yeah,
how were you able to relate or have any experiences related to Bapa?
well, I guess partly was just being at Wisma Subud that 2 months. And yeah, part of it that was interesting was I did get a chance to meet with Bapak briefly right after I got there. It was kind of standard protocol, I guess, but I didn't get very much time. But I do remember, though, at the end, when it was time for me to leave, one of the things that I did while I was there, Pak Sudarto there were these two national policemen who would come by every Wednesday night and meet at Sudarto's place at Wisma Subud. And sometimes we would go out on these field trips, and I went with them a number of times and learned some amazing things just being around Pak Sudarto and hearing what he had to say. And when it came time for me to leave, uh, somebody said, well, Bapak was meeting with helpers and stuff like that. And I wasn't yet a helper, but he said it was also for committee members. I said, oh, well, I'm a committee member in Subud Berkeley. But actually, before that even happened, that afternoon, Bapak had come up to the veranda in the guest house and was there and sitting with me while we had a little meal or some kind of snacks or something going that were sort of partly in celebration of my imminent departure, because I was going to take a plane the next day back to Subud. And Babak was very kind and friendly with me, not that we really spoke much of anything. But when I heard about going to this testing that Babak was doing with helpers and committee members, I said, well, I'm a committee member in Subud Berkeley. Maybe I could take part in that. So I had much more bravery than I sometimes had later. I said, well, okay, well, I'll check this out. So I kind of walked in there and kind of to everybody's surprise, I came through the back way into what was then the old latihan hall before they built the new one for the Congress, you know, in 71. And Babak said, well, I think he was doing some testing with Roger Lukito and making some comments on that were quite interesting about maybe when Brojo hesitated in reporting what his receiving was. He says, well, Roger, you're not quite just letting it happen yet. Just let go and let's let it come, and it will be there, and it'll be there immediately, and it'll be clear, and you don't have to worry about it. But anyway, I kind of walked in the middle of that, and Babak said, well, you have to get up and leave very early in the morning to catch your flight. So I think it might be better if you would just go ahead and go home and go get to sleep, and so you can get up and early and get, and just in this very kind, gentle way, he just kind of let me leave because I wasn't really ready for whatever was going on there, you know. It was a bit too rich for my blood, perhaps. So I said, "Oh, okay," you know, and I just, but I felt like I was treated with such gentleness and respect by Bapak that I was really grateful to him that he was so gracious about the way he handled my sort of out of place eruption into that testing that was going on. So that's something. So yeah, I was anyway. I just I really got to love Babak very much from that. And I was in a lot of testing later with Babak as he visited places where I was in, you know, particularly San Francisco and LA. I do remember though that I often had this tendency of feeling very shy. It's like I didn't want to be seen by Babak. When he was up there on the stage or maybe walking around among the guys who were testing, when the men, I'd want to go way in the back end and hide. It's like I don't want Babak to see me. I don't really I'm not good enough to be here. It was kind of the feeling like, what am I doing? But of course that was all bullshit, you know. And I think there was one occasion where I just find myself up near the front anyway. And there he was, and he just came by and kind of looked at me, and I said, "Oh shit, here he is." And then I just had to, okay, whatever he's seeing about me, he's seeing. I just have to live with that, you know. I am what I am. Uh, I don't know if this tells anything or not, but that's what I recollect.
So do you remember much in terms of what Siddhartha told you? Anything, any interesting stories related to that?
Oh, very much, yeah. For example, I think one of the biggest things was this. I talked about my father's father, my grandfather Salisbury, who had died in October of 1964, not long after I was opened, like the same year. I was opened in February. He died, I think, in October of that year, just a few months shy of his, what would it have been, his 92nd birthday, I think. No, he's born 19, oh, he's born in 1870. So he's 1870, and I knew him for, well, you know, I got to know him when I was about 3 years old when he was visiting us as a young family in Massachusetts when I was just a little kid. But I really got acquainted with him then, and later he spent time with us when we lived in first in Lafayette, if you know where that is, and in Palo Alto.
Mhm.
But right after he died, before I went to Wisma Subud, I had had this dream about him in which I saw him walking towards me, supported by two figures who were sort of like undertakers or something. I don't know what to call them, but he had his eyes shut. It's like he wasn't really exactly conscious, but he was being held up by these two men who were walking with him toward me. And I walked up to him, and I had in my hand a bottle, like a Coke bottle, but with water in it. And I put that hand on the top of his head, and I said something which, in retrospect, seemed awfully pompous. But I said, "In the name of all Christ everywhere throughout the world, I anoint thee." Oh shit, where did that come from? You know, that was, I'm not like that at all, you know, but that's what I said. And then later I had a dream where I went and looked in my closet of clothes closet, and there was my grandfather hung up in the closet, dressed in, you know, like hanging there, still unconscious, but dressed in these clothes that were a much nicer suit than he'd been wearing. It was like a brown, beautiful suit of clothes. And I described these dreams to Siddhartha, And there was one other also about seeing what I thought was an earthquake, where I was standing somewhere and all of a sudden this chasm of earth opened up and like this chasm was racing towards me. And in a moment it was going to open up and swallow me. And then I found myself just floating up in the air above it all. So these were dreams that I asked Sudarto about. And he said, well, um, first of all, the dream about the earthquake means that you're going to study something related to that. Because, there was something about after I was up in the air, I saw what I thought was mankind or humanity on the march going in some direction, which I took to be a very positive thing at that time. I'm not so sure now that that was really the right interpretation. But he said, well, you may see something like this, but what was happening there was that it's as if you were experiencing what it's like to die but it's not about your actual death, but it's like I could see without eyes and hear without ears and all of that, but just be this disembodied spirit seeing this. What the meaning of the march of people was, I don't know. But he said, as far as your grandfather is concerned, you have not opened him yet because your jiwa is not yet strong enough to open his jiwa. But eventually you will have a dream in which you will see him go like this. And he went, oh, and you'll see him wake up. When that happens, that will let you know that your jiwa has opened his jiwa, or through your jiwa has come the great life force that can open his jiwa. I don't know if I've ever had that dream or not. I've had one or two that seemed that they might have been that, but it was never clear. So I don't know. I sometimes think I'm actually very slow to develop and have a very weak jiwa still, and very slow to progress spiritually. But it is what it is. It is, and I am what I am. But Sudarto kind of did, not that he was harsh with it. He didn't say anything harsh, but he didn't lie to me. You know what I'm saying? He didn't pull any punches. He kind of told me what
Yeah.
was his receiving, and I said, well, okay, well, just had to believe it. To me, he was very, very special. I was so grateful for the time I had with Siddhartha.
Yeah. Any other kind of like spiritual happenings that you can recall stand out?
Well, let me think about that for a moment. Well, I think, yeah, there was certainly some receiving I had around meeting my first wife, uh, whose maiden name was Henrietta Simonson, and her father, as you may know, was Bengt Simonson. That was his Swedish name, but he got the Subud name Karsten later. He had gone to Oslo in 1960 to be opened in Oslo by Norwegian brother who died not too many years ago. Oh God, I hate it. This is what Parkinson's does. It makes me forget names. I'm much slower with names. You must know his widow is Ida Stralberg, Halstein Stralberg.
Okay. Yeah.
Somehow, uh, banked as he was then, found out about Subud and made this arrangement to meet with Holstein, who had been opened at Wolfsburg. No, I'm not at Wolfsburg, at Coombe Springs in 1957, I think, or maybe 58. But I think it's 57. And then he went back to Norway. And so Bengt went to Oslo and met with Karsten. I mean, there I go. I already lost the name again. Hallstein. And Hallstein opened him. And then he later moved to California. And I met him actually at Wayne Largo's house in 1968 when he had just moved there. And then later his wife and daughter moved there, or his daughter, that is Henrietta's younger sister. And through meeting them, I ended up getting acquainted with Henrietta at the 1971 World Congress, in which it seemed to me the way that we met and the way we kept running into each other almost by accident and spending time together and having meals together where they had all a bunch of different dining places all over the place. We'd always seem to end up at the same one at the same time, and we'd eat dinner together and all this stuff. And pretty soon it began to seem, and then when one night we stayed up all night and went out in one of the little nearby villages that were surrounded with Subud at that time outside the compound in the rice paddies, but up on these little sort of levee-like things that were amongst the rice paddies. And we're up all night long talking. And it was so different from any experience that I'd had with a woman before. I think the one who introduced us was Ibrahim Butler's first wife, Rohana. If you remember her, tall, statuesque blonde woman.
Yeah.
Anyway, somehow she introduced or told me about Henrietta, and we met. And it just seemed natural that we were brought together. The way the marriage turned out, though, it did not work. And I've often wondered about that. And all I can say is, for all I know, we were soulmates. I don't know. But if so, we were so mired in our own crap that we still needed to purify that we kind of drowned in an ocean of all our stuff. Just in an ocean of nafsu and purification and stuff like that. And we couldn't make the marriage work. And we had 4 kids, and then the marriage ended, And she left Subud long ago, much to my disappointment. 40 years ago, she was the last time she ever did latihan, as far as I know. But
she's still alive.
Yeah, she's still alive. Yeah, and I saw her not too long ago. But she really doesn't like me. But her brother Samuel Simonson, as you may know, stayed with Subud until he died. He was opened in Wolfsburg, as Henrietta was, not long after he was. And Samuel stayed with Subud until he died. And I wish he and I had become close. But then Henrietta wished that too. But he was somehow a very closed off person, even with his sister. And I never knew how to get close to him. I always wanted to, but he just was kind of buttoned up,
What was his last name?
Simonson, Simonson.
Okay.
Now that was interesting because that was not the name that Bengt would have had, except that he decided to take it. The tradition then was that you took the first name of your father and made that your last name. Okay, so his father's name had been Simon, and so he took Simonson, but after that he made that his patronymic, his last name, and he kept that. So that became a last name of the family from then on. That was the family name. Anyway, so were we guided together? I think so, but I didn't know how to be a husband. Not sure I was a very good father either. I tried, but I think I was kind of an asshole, frankly. So, but I think I carried a lot of rage, which I didn't even know about until after I got married, and then it began to come out, and oh boy. Oh boy. But I think a lot of that's gone now, finally, thank God. Not entirely, but a lot of it. A lot of it's gone away, but it's taken a long, long time to let go of that,
Yeah. So how about your current wife? How did you two get together?
Well, let me try to think back. How did that happen? God, I'm so lost in all these memories now. I have to kind of move the clock forward, Well, I know how it was. I don't know if you know who the Docksons are. Samuel and Mindy Dockson. Is it
Dockson?
Dokson? Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, they were open. They are currently living somewhere in the vicinity of Chico or Eureka, around there somewhere. I forget exactly. Not Chico, Eureka, or anyway, it's
Yeah,
you know that area up there.
yeah.
Uh, but for a while they moved further south, and they were living. Actually, they were teaching at the same high school where Mary ended up teaching. She went through a divorce from her first husband up in Missoula, Montana. And then it was a bad breakup, and she was more or less forced by what he did to leave Missoula and move down to, because she could get a job down here teaching. Ended up teaching at the same school where Samuel and Mindy were teaching. And for some reason, Samuel, for the first time ever with anybody that he met through his job, felt that he ought to talk to her about Subud, and so he did. And so she took to it, and she decided to get open. She still misses Montana, and she'll be going back there because her kids are still there. She'll be back there for Christmas with her kids and grandkids. I can't go because it's just too goddamn cold for me up there in the winter. It's not eastern Montana, which will freeze your nuts off, but even in that little valley where Missoula is, it's still way too cold for me. So she gets to go there by herself, and I'm going to stay here. But anyway, I love her kids. I think they're terrific, and her grandkids. But anyway, somehow the first time we met, and Mindy introduced us, and somehow we got to talking about Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto. Now, I don't know if you know much classical music, but that was a favorite of both of ours, and it still is one of mine. In fact, I started listening to that on my parents' phonograph, and with the old 78 RPM platters that drop
Yeah.
down, when I was 2 years old. And I guess I used to bug my mom. Mom, put this stuff on she had all these classical recordings. And I said, Mom, I want to listen to that. Mom, I want to listen to that. So apparently when I was about 2 years old, she said, look, Alan, because my name was William Allen Salisbury, but I always went by Alan. But that had the unfortunate effect that my initials were was. So in a sense, I was born as a has-been. So I'm glad I got dropped the William and became Richard, eventually. But so I began to listen to that, and I would put it on and watch it drop, and then I'd go through that concerto, and I just listened to that over and over and over. And also Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto, which I love, but I think Rachmaninoff beats anything. I think of the Romantic composer, although he was kind of a 20th century throwback, he's one of the very greatest. I think Rachmaninoff is just incredible. His third piano concerto, I think, is even greater than his second. And but anyway, Mindy comes in with Mary and introduces us, and we start talking, and we realize that we love the second piano concerto, so we kind of hit it off on that note, and then we just got better and better acquainted, and pretty soon it seemed like we just wanted to spend more time together, and we kind of just started hanging out, and then eventually we, not to put too fine a point on it, we became lovers before we were married. And I'm not sure that was the proper thing to do, but that's how it happened.
Yeah.
But we made it through all that, and I think we have gotten to the point where we have a pretty good marriage. We still get pissed at each other sometimes, but just not as much. I've let go of a lot of stuff. I understand what she went through as a child, and I understand that gives her some limitations, particularly with respect to how she may treat me, or well, I sometimes think of ill treat me, but so what? It doesn't matter. It's not important. Just got to make it work, and we're doing that. We're doing that. Just part of it's just experiencing what you have to experience it, and letting go, and trusting your guidance, and letting go of the small stuff, because it's all small. Who said that? Somebody said that So some wag said, "Don't sweat the small stuff," and it's all small stuff.
Yeah.
Some famous person said that. I can't remember who. But that boy, that the more I'm in Subud, the more true that seems. It's all small stuff, you know.
So uh, how would you grade your experience in Subud in terms of your life?
Oh, absolutely central. I used to think because, and there was a point when had started going again to the Berkeley Subud group because I was then by that time I was working on back in school and working on a degree. And I got to the point where I got a degree in history and I got a secondary teaching credential. And I was doing testing about where to go, what was the next step. One of the questions was, and I remember Just Pope was there. It was through Just that everybody else among that I knew, a bunch of people that I knew got open. Uh, Wayne Larigo being maybe next in line, and then through Wayne I got open, et cetera, et cetera. But including Hamilton Chafee. But Hamilton's older brother Kenneth was a helper then in Berkeley, and Just Pope was there as a helper. And I wanted to test about. I was an alternate for two PhD fellowships in history, one at Berkeley and one at UCLA. Now, alternate, of course, didn't mean I'd get it. It meant that if a spot came up, I might get it, So I could hang out and wait for that and see if a spot opened up where I could actually have access to the fellowship or not. But I wanted to test about that. And so we did some testing. And what was your question? I know you're going to ask me something. You asked me something, and I'm trying to answer that, but probably going into too much detail. What was it you asked exactly? I got a little lost in my context.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any more questions, but if you have anything else you'd like to add.
Well, I'll finish where I think I wanted to go with that, which isn't very much to say. But the testing was interesting because they put me in the center at one point, and we tested, well, how would it be for me to go for one of these graduate fellowships?
Mhm.
And the testing that I received was I was just all bound up like this, just like, ooh, and I couldn't move. And then Just said, well, and I think Just maybe got in the center with me. So it was the two of us with the other helpers around us. And we tested, well, how would it be for you if you let go of that and just go ahead and continue with the teaching that you're now, or you will soon be in a position to do? You finish your credential, then you go for a teaching career. And what we got was, boy, things opened up, but at the same time, boy, there was a lot of crying. I just remember crying a lot and Just said, it's going to be very, very difficult for you, but it's what you need. It's what you need to go through, and it'll prepare you for the next step. And indeed, that's what happened because I did teach. And then eventually that led me to my second career, which was as a software technical writer, which I did for 12 years. And eventually that led to becoming a marriage and family therapist, which is by far the longest and most satisfying career. Would have been great, except for all the paperwork, which I hated. But I loved being a therapist. I really loved it. It was just a great experience for me. So I think your question was something about how central has Subud been to my life. Absolutely central. I can't imagine being as good as I am, however good that is, if it had not been for the latihan. I simply cannot conceive of it. Conceive of me without the latihan. It's like who I am. So I guess that maybe helps to answer that question.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you, Rahman. You've been very patient with my tendency to extrapolate or digress or whatever it is. And,
Well, I appreciate your sharing your story. So thank you very much.
well, thank you for being a good listener and asking the right questions.
I'm going to end the recording now.
Okay.